On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I run D3 Digital Marketing. And before we get into the interview today with Darwin, I wanted to just play a brief infomercial about our company.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts, and webinars, to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit d3digitalmedia.com to learn more.
So with that, let me bring up our guest. In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Darwin Shurig. He's the founder of Shurig Solutions. Darwin brings strategic value to medical device, life science, and pharma companies. He's also responsible for most, if not all, business process, project management, recruitment, sales, operations, quality, and regulatory affairs, to mention a few. And so with that, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Don. Great video clip advertising, what you guys do. So I liked it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. It's kind of funny because I was telling somebody just recently, we've seen a lot of people start to talk to us about helping them with podcasts. Also, a lot of webinars and things like that in our space. And so there's just a lot of overall opportunities. Also, I don't know, do you attend any of the shows?
I do. I just got back a couple weeks ago. I was at LSI Emerging MedTech conference in Dana Point. So that's the seventh conference in a row we've attended for them. The last two we've sponsored, and I've had the opportunity to present at two of them. So it's the first. So I'm just about 9 years here coming up on the 9-year anniversary. So the first probably 3 to 4 years, I never attended anything. Just trying to figure out how to stay in business and bring value and what the heck I was doing, because I'd never owned a business before or been in the recruitment industry. But the last 4 years in particular, we've started to get more involved, starting out with a couple, and then 5 to 6, it will typically go to RAPS for regulatory affairs, professional society. I've been to the last 4 of those, had the opportunity to present and sponsor in Montreal this last year. Is another one that we certainly go to too.
Yeah, it just seems like a great way to connect, especially given, how much time we actually spend apart. But anyway, I just wanted to maybe just start off a little bit with regards to your background and, what sort of started Shurig Solutions. Where did you start your career, more or less? Because I found this interesting as I went through kind of your background, because I'm like, okay, cause it seems like everybody that I know that's in this space that winds up, as a recruiter or somebody that overall looks, to try and help organizations with staffing and things like that. I feel like a lot of people come from this, they're very connected, but also, more on the social and, just more people that want to connect with people overall and it's not very common whenever you're dealing with all these scientists and chemists and things like that. So I just thought I would throw that out there for you to help fill in your background a little.
No, absolutely. I don't think there's too many people that sit around at Christmas or their birthday, hoping they're going to open gifts, like become a firefighter, right, or a policeman, or that they grow up wanting to be a recruiter or be involved in talent management. Maybe it had never been something that had occurred to me or that I thought about. So there are aspects of kind of where I'm at now. I feel like I've already lived a couple different lives, but so I have a clinical background in respiratory therapy and started out, hospital, ER, that kind of ventilation and critical care for several years. And then I always knew that I wanted to get more involved in industry outside of being in a hospital or clinical setting. So I had gone back, got my MBA, and I spent 12 years in corporate America in sales, managing sales teams, business development, and contract negotiation. So I was a part of an acquisition that ended up laying off over 200 of us from the old company after the integration was complete. And that was, that happened in February of 2015. And so I was looking, it was a good market if you were going to get laid off at that time. For my background and my skill set, I was getting to interview a lot. I had some things that were pretty interesting. And a friend of mine that owned his own recruiting firm encouraged me to take a look at it. I really didn't have any interest at first because I hadn't had necessarily great experiences with recruiters per se. I always found it to be very transactional, and I have a much different perspective of it now. I've had incredible mentors and had interacted with a lot of amazing professionals, but at the time I didn't look at it. It didn't seem very appealing to me. And however, after looking at it, I really decided that I was going to be most likely mentoring or continuing to lead people one way or another. I was going to continue to do business development and marketing and build relationships. And I just decided, you know what? It really doesn't matter what recruiters do that I don't like or what the industry looks like. I can put my own value prop upon it. And I felt like I had some things and some ideas that might bring value to the marketplace. So I decided to dive in. That was in 2015, almost 9 years ago.
And almost, I mean, I would almost say that with your background as well, with business development and, more of the marketing side, it probably would have had to have helped you. Cause I mean, that's where I initially spent a lot of time struggling. I just felt like, okay, so first of all, what does a consultant do? And then, the podcast happened, and then, more or less the digital marketing side I wound up building over time because of the fact that, it was something that I had to figure out over time. And it was one of those things that now having people come to me and ask, how do we do this is, an honor, but also, something that you have to build, if you don't already have it. So.
Absolutely. And I think that was really smart on your part. But the fact that you have people coming and asking you to help them replicate what you've developed certainly is a huge compliment. And it tells you that how you're presenting yourself in the marketplace is being well received and in a very positive light. So kudos to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so what, you said that you were in like respiratory therapy initially. What sort of led you to want to be somebody in the medical field or life sciences field?
Well, I struggled greatly with trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And I always loved sports. Born and raised here in Indiana, basketball has always been huge. So I grew up with no cell phones, no internet, and 3 channels. And so growing up, being outside all the time and playing sports, and we didn't sit around playing video games or texting or things that a lot of being on social media, a lot of those aspects obviously were not around. So, but being 5'10", 5'11", and basketball, I got the opportunity to play in college. I've always appreciated competitive sports and teamwork and the things that go along with that. So, but that wasn't going to last for too long, most likely, and didn't. But I got the opportunity to in school, then, go to school, and I was going to get a business degree and was looking at some different things. My family, my mother was a nurse. And so I just kind of healthcare, I've always cared about, other people and understanding. So just being able to bring value to somebody that's sick and help them with a positive outcome. The idea of that, when I was in school, and very quickly realized I wasn't going on to be drafted. Right. Year one. I probably ought to, in the time I'm here, get something of value that I can take out into the world and bring value to other people. And so clinically, respiratory just kind of, I liked aspects of it more. And then I think knowing, doing patient care, I think that it, certainly it's humbling.
Yeah.
And I've been in hospitals and done, ventilator trials on patients and taking care of family members that, their neurological disease progressed so quickly. It's just in front of your eyes. You see somebody that is functional and appears normal in health, and they're gone a year later. And certainly with children, you go in and you see, and you think, wow, my life's not, I've got a lot of blessings. I got a lot of opportunity to be appreciative. So that's always been something that has been of interest to me. And then getting, I wanted to be at companies that were bringing products to patients. And I look at everything relevant to either improving patient outcomes, improving patient access, or improving the efficiency of the healthcare system so that we can then spend those dollars elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously to be in business, you have to make money to stay in business, to keep the lights on and to pay the bills. But that's, our mission statement sitting right here on my mouse pad is to help people with relevant career advancement opportunities, but building companies that are bringing positive products to patients, to our families, and then supporting the charities that we care about. So it just kind of was a natural segue. I just felt like when I was going to do this, I didn't really know what I was going to try to recruit for and help people with opportunities. And at first it was like, oh, are you going to do sales and marketing? And I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to do more technical roles and learn some things along the way, and be more involved on the front end of clinical trials and process and risk management and access to markets to get to patients, what that looked like, and then the development of it. So I've done quite a bit in commercial roles, particularly over the last 3 years, but clinical RAQA, challenging technical roles are kind of more what I enjoy working on more so, I would say.
Very good. In terms of your career and, kind of your background and the path that you took, you touched on it a little bit just a second ago, but I wanted to circle back to this question. In your career path, did you find that there were pivotal moments that kind of led you to where you are today? And if so, what were those?
That's a great question. There's so many nuggets, so many things that I've had the opportunity to learn, some unfortunately the hard way versus others. But I think, so I'll speak to this relevant to some things that you just said earlier. I'll kind of tie those together if that's okay. But if you look at business and being an entrepreneur, almost, over 40%, it depends on the numbers that you look at, and they can change, and you can make numbers, industries and what you look like. But startups, over 40% of startups don't make it a year. 50% of those that make it a year are not around in year 5. Mm-hmm. And then close to 80% of businesses don't make it 10 years across all industries. So forget about, starting a business, staying in business, scaling a business. Being in business is not easy. It's hard. Yeah. And there's typically, 7 to 9 key factors on why businesses succeed or fail across all industries, and are pretty timeless. Respecting data and understanding data and analytics has obviously become even more significant in the age of the metaverse and AI. So that's maybe over the last 10 to 15 years become more prominent and kind of added to the list. But, I always thought I wanted to own a business or start a business. When I did my MBA, I did my thesis on starting sleep labs. Mm. I looked at owning a business 2-3 different times, but I joke that owning a business is like having, when I got my MBA, having your MBA. Well, you know how to run a business, you have an MBA. That's like saying I can run a hotel. Like, I've stayed at a whole bunch of hotels, I can run it. Like, no, that's kind of the analogy that I jokingly look at. But you talked about getting started, and even in consulting or whatever it is that you're going to do, you may have incredible skills and value to bring, but marketing and understanding voice of the customer and what matters to them, understanding funnel management relevant to how they make decisions in the cycle versus activities that you do.
Right.
We could talk about this the whole session. essentially, but it's not easy. And you have to really, there's only so much, there's only so much time and so many resources, and efficiency is vital. And so really understanding who you want to be in the marketplace, your value prop, being able to communicate that and protect it,
Yeah.
and understanding that you're going to go through a lot of rejection, and you have to be okay with that. So again, it's the numbers depending on what you look at, but at the time that I started, they told me 80% of people that enter the marketplace in recruiting or talent management don't last a year. And from a just getting involved, not in terms of owning a business. Now I've seen data since then. I saw one relevant to Great Britain was just phenomenal. It was like almost 70. No, it was like over 80% of businesses that start up in recruitment in the UK don't make it a year, for example.
Wow.
So obviously a lot of time, investment, heart and soul. And so you really have to understand what it is, who your market is, who your total accessible market, your TAM, your SAM, all your, in terms of marketing 101. But I think it's really vitally important to know what your personal why is and why you're doing what you're doing. Because if you don't understand that, the chances of making it through the adversity and there's, in what we do in consulting, in certain aspects of consulting, but certainly in recruiting, there, you don't have to have a certain degree, you don't have to have a license. And so when the market's good, a lot of people tend to jump in, and it can be kind of like the Wild West sometimes with how people do things. And obviously people get inundated by people reaching out to them, and people are exhausted by the amount of, it's like, I saw some data on how many people have their own web page now. I mean, people are just inundated with data and information and trying to be sold something. And so you have to be able to differentiate yourself clear and concisely. You only have so much time, and you have to be able to handle rejection, because you're going to get rejected a lot to have any chance of making it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it is an interesting environment, given that pretty much anybody can hang up a shingle and just say, hey, look, this is, I can do this too. And, I could do it equally or better. And so many times I feel like the proof isn't necessarily in that longevity, right? In terms of, what people have actually proven out, it's, can they say it better? Can they actually have a website that looks better? And those things that, seem to actually guide people. But I completely resonate with what you're saying as well, that, a lot of this is, falling down, dusting yourself off and saying, hey, look, okay, so what did I learn out of that? What's my next, part of the path forward? And then continuing on. And if you're not passionate about whatever it is, then at the end of the day, it can become a challenge. But, certainly bringing talent into, companies and sort of navigating that, you have to also, I would imagine, navigate a lot of challenges as well, from, all of the things that you're trying to recruit for. How do you find your way? How do you sort of navigate that path?
That's a great question. And I think it's still, I'll be very transparent in terms of what has been a real blessing to me, having the ability to work on multiple types of roles. It probably saved me when the pandemic hit, because at that time, the company, I was probably 85 to 90% of our partners were in medical device, surgical. Well, all those surgeries went on hold. And we had $180,000 in revenue offers that were accepted, that were rescinded in March, April, after the pandemic hit. That was painful. And all that work had already been done, right? So those resources and the cost aspect were already done. And so I had to pivot and make some changes and really focus on some different areas to be able to kind of survive that gap and then start to grow again. So in a perfect world, being niche, they say there's, reaches in the niches, riches in the niches.
Yeah, right.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And for us, like, there's companies that do the same amount of revenue that we do, or that we did 2 years ago was our highest year. We did 2.5 million in revenue. There are people that do that just in pharmaceutical regulatory affairs at 3 levels, and that's it, in 3 cities, for example. So I think the more specific you are, the better you understand that and know what you're going after. And then you get reusable parts, or you get return business. And I think in terms of that process, it can be a lot smarter. So I've always struggled with that, because I like I like to learn new things. I like learning complexity. And so I filled just about every engineering role in general, firmware, software development, software quality, process R&D engineering for technology transfer, and design failure modes and effects analysis. And so I don't mind working on different things, but so the positive in that is that you have the ability to do a lot of different things. You understand how the business works, relevant to if it's, setting up a clinical trial, if somebody's program management, you understand the different parts and how you communicate and talk to talent. Because I've always found that the things that people get most frustrated about recruiters or our industry is they don't really know what they do. They're using keywords, and they don't really necessarily understand what they do in the role, in and out effectively. They are selling or pushing an opportunity, or trying to get them to maybe take a lateral move to get a fee. Those are kind of, over the history, the things that I typically hear. And so the positive in terms of being willing to do more things is that learning and understanding what people do. And then a client can come to us. I have multiple examples of starting with a position, maybe in quality or regulatory or engineering, but then turn around and filling a marketing role for him, filling a program management role. We have one partner that we've filled 66 roles over 4.5 years. And I've worked on clinical affairs, medical affairs. We help fill a position in quality or in commercial operations to help with, analysis and setup of the commission plan. Automation controls engineering, help them with their PMO. So if you get a good partner and then they like you and you work well together and appreciate it, then you have other areas to go in. And so whereas if you're really niche, then you're going to have most likely have to have more clients, and you're going to work on less roles. And so it's kind of, what do you want to do? There are times that I think about it and say, I should really maybe not do this. Or there's certain roles that, I should just, because again, you have more reusable parts. And from an efficiency standpoint, definitely in a market like this last year where things have so many layoffs, companies, the Fed raised the rate. So it essentially cost 3 times the amount of money it did before to borrow. Our economy, and not to argue politics or anything like that, we're in a recession, we're not in a recession, but it costs 3 times to buy the same meal, and, it's a third the size, and everything costs a lot more. And so we've seen a lot of scenarios where companies are not backfilling roles, or they're just not paying external fees. And so it is a much tighter market, and people are struggling to get jobs more so. And, I haven't lived through, one of my mentors is like, this is the 9th time I've lived through one of these in 30 years. And, half the market goes out of business. So I would say that what has been a strength, like when the pandemic, in certain years, it can hurt you a little bit more, not being as specific in terms of, so it just kind of depends on what you want to do and how you want to do things. But regardless, what we've hung our hat on is outcomes and bringing value. We've never paid a fee, but we've never had to pay a fee back in the entire 9 years. So from a guarantee standpoint, 94% offer acceptance rate. So I jokingly call it the runaway bride, because how many people waste time and resources looking at talent, interviewing people maybe they shouldn't be interviewing because they weren't the right fit, or interviewing somebody that they like and they want, but they were never going to be aligned to get them across the finish line from a comp or whatever that intangible is. And so helping, make sure, look, we're going to vet and make sure that we bring talent and manage the process in a way that you've got a really high chance of it working for everybody because of that transparency and that understanding. And then a third of our candidates that accepted an offer have been promoted within 24 months. So kind of looking at that cultural fit, is it working well or not? And if you have a company that's growing and needs good talent and you bring in a cultural fit, then they're probably going to do well and have an opportunity to be rewarded. So it kind of makes sense. And then they stay a third longer than the industry average when it comes to retention. So again, when we were talking earlier, why companies succeed and fail, those 8 to 9 things, but leadership relevant to mission, vision, company alignment or misalignment, and the right or wrong talent. And when you look at life science, I'll just take med tech, but it doesn't matter if you look at clinical trials, if you look at regulatory submissions, it's like 70% of regulatory affairs 510K submissions are not approved the first time.
Right.
If you look at the reasons why, it all comes back to talent, poor leadership, cutting corners, misunderstanding of regs. FDA warning letters is a great example. The average cost for a medical device company that gets an FDA warning letter is over $5 million. Annually, it's over $6 billion spent. And for publicly traded companies, there's typically, there can be up to a 10% drop in your stock price. And if you look at the top 10 reasons why, it all comes back to leadership, cutting corners, not understanding risk management, misinterpretation of guidelines, using your predicate device for the wrong substantial equivalence. It was used improperly. So that is a huge amount of risk to put your company under. And again, my perspective is it all comes back to hiring for culture, that the focus should be to high people. If somebody's a 12 out of 10 on technical, whatever the skill is, the functional area, but they have low emotional intelligence, they're not a problem solver, they don't get along well with other people, whatever those things that you're going to look at relevant to cultural fit and intangibles, if they aren't a fit, you shouldn't hire them. Right. And if somebody's great relevant to those areas and they get invited to the Christmas party, to the cookout, but they don't have the minimal technical skill, you shouldn't hire them for that position.
Right.
And when you look at the cost of mishires, you look at the fact that across all industries, 25% annual voluntary turnover averages 25% across all industries. So that means every year, a fourth of the talent's walking out the door. And oftentimes it's not the people that you want to walk out the door.
Right.
So understanding cultural fit, what you need the person to do, how the position could change in the first 6 to 24 months, and understanding why people leave and why people stay. When you look at how often business fails and succeed, those I would propose that those should be areas that companies should really be trying to understand to be successful.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe dive a little bit deeper into when people should definitely be considering using a recruiter. I can give you my philosophy while you think about your answer as well. But I mean, my philosophy was always, look, if the market is full of people and I can more or less have my pick, then those roles I personally wouldn't send to a recruiter. I wouldn't do it. Right. I would sort of, sift through the resumes, and we hold as many interviews as we have to hold before we sort of come back to the realization that this is the right candidate or whatever based on our selection criteria. And we'd have very clear, I always made sure that, both myself and any other hiring manager that worked for me, that we had very clear criteria in terms of this is what we're recruiting for. The person could walk in with some other great skill, and because that's the thing, right? Somebody walks in and all of a sudden somebody goes, yeah, but I could use them there. Yeah, you could, but we don't have a job opening for that. Right. I'm recruiting for this thing right here, right now, and we need this. And if that person comes in with that plus more, great, I will take them. But if they don't have the base capabilities, then we just shouldn't hire them. But anyway, however, I always would find myself in this weird spot where I'm hiring for an albatross, right? I'm like trying to find this one unique skill set that nobody else seems to have. And if somebody has it, I need to unbolt them from another organization. And to me, those were always the times that I would
Yes.
pick up the phone to my favorite recruiter and go, hey, I need I need some help finding this because I'm not going to find it on my own. I'm not going to
Right.
spend my time trying to unbolt somebody, and I also am, you're just not the right person to do it. And I feel like you guys, I feel like the talent management folks out there really deserve a lot of credit for sort of going to people and going, hey, this is why this is the right role for you, to the other side, but also to the hiring manager as well. This is why this is the right candidate. So anyway, those are my sort of reasons, and would love to hear, what is your philosophy in terms of people, why should they come to Shurig Solutions?
No, it's a great question. I was thinking about, as you talked about, kind of how you looked at it, and so I started to present the year before on talent management strategies, attraction, efficiency, and retention. And again, I think that looking at your processes, no matter what your positions are, and from an outcome standpoint, how can you be successful long term or as efficient you want to be if you don't value outcomes and analytics to look at what's working, what's not working, to create real best practices? And one of the slides I put up is a quality management system, and ask, if relevant to your talent management strategies, how you treat people from an efficiency standpoint, feedback, everything. If that mirrored the quality management system for the product or the service that you provide, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And oftentimes, from my experience, it would not necessarily be a good thing. So to your point, you absolutely shouldn't use. I don't think a company needs to use recruiting for all positions, but I think oftentimes not understanding what matters, and I'll give a little bit more insight to that. Like what is it that you're trying to do? I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do. You can hire somebody in and have them do everything. I talked to a company that's going to hire 60 people this year. Really enjoyed the conversation with the head of talent. He's filling all the roles himself. It's a good market to per se to get talent. And if you have the skill set, because it's not about finding anybody in this day and age. If you can't find the talent, that's another story. It's about, will they respond to you? Do you understand how to get to people in a way that they will respond to you? And then do you have the ability to attract them to your value prop and communicate in a way that makes sense to be able to move into that process? So they don't need an outside resource right now. They're filling all the roles. They're getting good talent. Like in another year or so, then maybe you can go get 4 or 5 companies and pay the lowest fees in the industry and have them all compete against each other. Now, I'm not a big fan of that. I look at real estate. Can you imagine, like, if you're looking at houses and there's a house with 5 signs in yard, and you've got 5 agents trying, I have no interest in dealing with that. And so understanding companies pay millions of dollars as they become established to create a value prop in the marketplace. And now you're working with recruiting firms and you have no idea what they're saying or how they're treating people. And so I've seen companies create a burn of talent behind them, of people's like, yeah, I'd never even consider that company because of, so the talent obviously talks. Having retained, starting out with retainer for your leadership positions, and then maybe adjusting down to contingent, creating a system in-house so that you should create best practices to not have to use recruiting firms. And really, I would say I have friends that are service providers, and I try to look at it the same way, that if I'm working with a company that's growing, in a sense, they should be able to eliminate you by working, because they get to work with you over a couple of years, because you're helping them in certain areas and processes, customization of the interview process to delineate between cultural fit and the technical skill. But you talked about the albatross. I think even with that, if you need a certain skill, what do you need it for and how long do you need it? The MDR is a great example right now. There have been situations over the last 2 years where clients like, oh, they have to have this relevant to MDR. Well, the MDR is going to be gone it's a specific aspect relevant to STED files, tech design dossiers, and the documentation, CERs, how it sits in the process, and from a safety, from a risk management standpoint, and they're much pickier relevant to product specific from a safety standpoint. And now everybody over there that touches it, before with the MDD, there was less liability across the board. Now there's liability, and it's more expensive. You have to have outcomes data for a longer period of times. So, but I've told more than one potential client, instead of just focusing just on the MDR, I understand why you're looking at that, but what are you going to do with this person in a year and a half? After you get past August and you've got your governing body and your QMS and everything set up the way you need it to be, those are skill sets that can cross over to other areas. So think about what you need the person to do. And if that's really all you need them to do, maybe you should just hire a contractor or consult it and bring it out of a different aspect of the bucket. But I would look at it, if I was starting a manufacturing company, I would look at it, these key areas, maybe we could do them ourselves, whether it's clinical, regulatory, design, quality. In the age of the metaverse, and you look at med tech's growing 6.5%, 7%, but AI, monitoring, wearable technologies, and robotic surgical are growing 24 to 30%, 32. Where are you going to get the talent from?
Right.
How are you going to attract? Are you going to overpay? What is your strategy going to look like? And I think understanding your value prop, understanding the person's ability to grow, and the cultural fit is huge, so that you can retain them after they show up, because everybody's going to be knocking on their door in certain functional areas. But I think in certain areas, I would say, look, these positions over here, we should create a system, best practices, hire the right talent. And for the most part, we shouldn't have to use recruiters. But in some of these different areas, I should already have built into my budget proactively, because if you do the reactionary approach, and now all of a sudden the position's been open 6 months, it's been open 8 months. Yeah. How does that affect your team? If you look at a regulatory scenario, it's like you're worried about, I've seen companies worry about paying $10,000 more or paying a recruiting fee, where if that product doesn't get on the market because there's an issue with the submission, now all of a sudden they've cost themselves millions of dollars, and they're worried about, let's say, a $30,000, $40,000 recruitment fee. Right. So I personally think, I know it may sound self-serving, but it is a $200 billion industry. So there are a lot of companies that are going to pay recruiters. It's just a matter of, that's why I think understanding your strategies and what areas are going to be harder. And if it's a critical leadership area, that comes back to a bigger risk of failure and losing talent. You look at the reasons why, candidates leave. One of the top reasons is not a good relationship or communication with their immediate manager, not feeling valued, working on doing work for an extended period of time that they didn't expect to do and don't want to do. Right. So they bought something different than what they were sold, is what I call that. Or they leave because they, 66% of one of the recent surveys over the last couple of years, because they don't see a path to grow anywhere. So that's their only belief to advance their career. And so using a good partner, if it's not transactional, again, wasted time and resources, not interviewing people you shouldn't be interviewing, if they're able to attract that message. And then you can kind of protect the hiring manager from themselves, because there are many situations where I've seen where somebody hires somebody within their network. That's great. They like them. They know them. They're part of the group. They saved on a recruitment fee, but they weren't the right person. And then they wouldn't tell them what they, more to tell them what they want to hear versus what they don't want to hear. So I just think there's a lot of the risk management, the cost of the mishire, and the wasted resources when you look at, for really critical areas, to not pay a recruitment fee, you have the opportunity to be short-sighted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely think that all of those things are important. And there were a lot of topics that you hit there so I noticed on your website, you have quite a few webinars that you've conducted. You have your own podcast and things like that. I feel like you really deep dive a lot of these different subjects, between each of the content pieces that you have as well on your website as well. Do you want to take a minute to just tell folks a little bit about the podcast and things that you covered?
Sure. So it's funny to me that I'm involved in those things, because I mean, my first 4 years, I didn't even have social media. One of my friends who I helped as a candidate 8 years ago, he's the CEO of Quality Means Business, and I'm on their board now. But I first helped him. I wouldn't even send a candidate an invite to connect on LinkedIn or a hiring manager, because I wasn't really on LinkedIn. I think I had 300 connections. I didn't do any social media. I just picked up the phone and I worked hard and tried to figure out how to bring value and to be different. And then I've also always, my goal has been to change the candidate experience, because my candidate experiences were never, great per se. Nothing against those people that I interviewed with or worked at, but I just always felt like it was, the communication maybe wasn't great. And it's like, should you go to an interview and then 2 weeks later not know how it went, or a week later? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That's just, and then back to the wasted resources. So I've just always felt that companies, if they could figure out a way to be more efficient, communicate more efficiently, and respect the candidates in the process better, that positive vibe and that message in the marketplace would benefit them extensively over the alternative, which I've seen quite a bit. So anyway, I, at about year 4 or 5, after kind of getting over 500,000 and starting to move towards that, breaking that $1 million barrier, I was like, there's got to be better ways to do this. If I want to do this long term, I have to do a better job of bringing value and be visible, even though I really would rather not be on. So if I had to choose, but it's not about you if you're focused in the right way, I think, in terms of bringing value. So I started webinars first. So we've done 33 of them at this point. The last one that we did was on design, verification, and validation, preclinical to commercial launch. And when I first started, it would almost always be one-on-one, but I've, over the last year, strategically starting to do more panel type scenarios, because I think it makes it even more interesting in getting the different opinions. I just think it brings even more value and exposure. And it's all about increasing your credibility and authority in the marketplace through other people's expertise. Right. But the purpose of the webinars was to bring value and to get people to start following us. And my hope was it would initially be because, hey, I want to grow my career there. This is good information that can benefit me, relevant to, I call them the golden nuggets, right? With leadership intangibles, how you should look at things, communication, preparation, and those stories of the career path part of the guest could be really valuable. But then my hope was that people would see the invites and see the information, see the social media. And then at some point there'd be, the senior director or the VP, the CEO would be like, wait a minute, we get stuff from this guy all the time. We have that problem right now. Like we need to sit in on this. And that's what started happening. We started getting leaders starting to get in and comment and share. And so that was the first part, but webinars are not easy. And I was doing a lot of that legwork, and we do them live. And so that's a little bit more challenging. And I wanted to create a pathway to do the webinars more efficiently. And so then I probably did it completely backwards of most people. It would be a lot smarter to just start with the podcast and go. But of course, I had to make it more complicated, which is part of my personality I have to be careful of. But we slowed down on the webinars in 2022, and then took about 4 months to really set up and strategically start the podcast last April, SSI Executive Conversations. And it's been a real blessing. I think we've gone over 1,400 downloads. We started out doing it every 2 weeks, and then in August went to dropping one a week. But it's just been great. And a lot of, CEOs, VPs, specialty type of scenarios to look at talent or communication. But again, it's all like, why is somebody going to follow you? If you can bring value, my philosophy and one of my mentors, I steal this from him, but bring as much value as possible and then hide in plain sight. And if you have integrity and your people can trust you and they know that you know what you're doing, because there's so much sales these days, right? And people reaching out to you, and I'm sure it happens to you all the time. I mean, I have people trying to sell me clinical trials software. There's no patience here. And I ignore a lot of people just like I get ignored. And if somebody does it a certain way, and then I'll be like, hey, you're barking up the wrong tree. Thanks for the invite. But if you don't even understand what your target audience is or what you're going after, again, that shows you're transactional. But if they can trust you, and then hopefully, just like what you're doing, it's bringing value to people because they're going to get some things from your guests and say, we can do better at this. That's really smart, because none of this stuff is easy. And so that was my goal. That was probably a little bit longer winded than, but my goal with the webinars and the podcast is to, I think one of my gifts is lifting other people up and bragging about them and positioning them in a way that's positive. And I think what comes around goes around. And if you bring enough value to other people, then it'll come back. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I would imagine that we will have people that are both searching for roles, like their next role, that watch or listen to this episode. And then also people that could be on the side of looking at, like, where do they go for, recruiting talent. And so on both sides, I felt like you had episodes and in your podcast and webinars that, would help on both sides. And so I wanted to make sure that you took a moment to highlight those. The final three questions are, let's start with what inspires you?
What inspires me is I really am inspired by products and scenarios that bring value in giving. And so charity's always been something. We've supported 5 charities over the time frame since the company was started. And so, I mean, we talk again about success and failure. It is better for the marketplace for companies to be successful.
Sure.
No matter what the company is, it's better if the product actually helps people and does what it says it's supposed to, right? With the least amount of risk and side effects, if it's whatever it is. And so I get inspired, especially with the new technologies and the things that are coming out. I mean, you look at cell and gene therapy. Last February, oh my gosh, I should know this number right off the top of my head. I think it's like 160 clinical trials going on for cell and gene therapy as of last February. The first CRISPR therapy came out within the last 2 months, which was a collaboration between Vertex and CRISPR Therapeutics for sickle cell anemia patients, 12 years or older. So thinking about if it's on the pharmaceutical or the biotech side, instead of taking a medication that's man-made, that's a Band-Aid and has other side effects, for example, but to be able to change somebody's life and, patients seeing for the first time. One of my friends is the CEO of Rapid Nexus. They're doing remarkable treatment that helps people from having to have their limbs removed on the diabetic side. So there is a lot of exciting and unique technology out there. So I get really inspired by scenarios that help families. And if you're a patient, it's not just the patient. If your child suffering, if your spouse is like, it affects everybody in that. So to be able to bring positive outcomes, and then if the company's thriving, the employees are obviously doing better than look at all these layoffs the last year. Mm-hmm. That's not. So I get inspired by seeing people that are passionate about what they do and they care about how the product benefits in the marketplace. And I get inspired for opportunities to that tie into to charity. I guess that's the best way to answer that.
Absolutely. What concerns you?
When's this when's this market going to change back to concerns me? So I think I'm an optimist. I'm a glasses half full type of person in general. So, I would say concern in terms of how we manage the metaverse and AI. And so I don't know the answers to that. I think that just in the last year and a half, what I've learned about AI and chat GTP, and it's blown my mind.
Sure.
I mean, I've joked at times, like if I've been living in a cave, like I didn't know some of this stuff had been going on for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, but there are scenarios. And I think if you're not using aspects of this, it's going to be really hard to be in business. It's kind of like, I think it was Gates, but back when the internet came on, like if you're not on the internet, you won't be in business. People thought he was nuts for saying what he said. And I mean, obviously he was absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So I think you have to have it as a piece of creating efficiency. But like we look at it, all the social media I've done, I do myself. The research is done. It's not somebody else doing. It's not. And there's been many scenarios where AI, we've tried to use it, and then I look at it and I'm like, that's not even right. Like that's not even what we do, or that's not even what the situation is. And that doesn't sound like me. Like I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for the fact. And when I first started doing the webinars, I was very uncomfortable. I wasn't great. I've had the opportunity by doing the work to get a lot better, but through the research and understanding things, if you don't do the work, right? So I've seen scenarios where candidates, it's just happened quite a bit. I just had a conversation with the vice president about this 2 weeks ago, but people are using chat GPT or AI to customize their resume to meet the job description. And then they get in the interview and the VP was like, yeah, we interview these people and they can't really talk about what's on their resume. and so
yeah.
There's always the scenario of, well, this is going to replace recruiters. This is going to, so the internet was going to do it. Then it was Monster. Then it was LinkedIn. I think somebody using AI better than somebody else can replace a job or a person's functional capacity. I don't see how you take the human aspect if you want to be successful, and back to the efficiency piece.
Right.
But how do we navigate that? The cybersecurity and aspects of that, if you think about it too long, can be terrifying. So I would say that was the only concern, is how we grow in that area, and on my part, how I make sure that I'm able to do it and bridge that gap in a successful fashion, and still being human, bringing the value that's relevant to human nature and personalities.
So important. Thanks for sharing that. And then the last question, what excites you?
I guess I kind of a little bit already answered this, but I'm incredibly excited about the future. About, if you look at what's going on with robotic surgical platforms, for instance, just 2 years ago, less than 5% of patients that had a surgery had it performed on a robotic surgical platform. That, to me, that's remarkable. When you look at the amount of money that's being invested there, LSI Emerging MedTech at Dana Point, when we were out there a few weeks ago, there was probably 9, 10 companies there. Intuitive is the name everybody knows, and that's dominated the market. There's 4 that have a respiratory platform, them being one of them. There's over 30 companies that are vying to be the first to have a soft tissue technology platform to get the first FDA approval there. So when you think about patient access, and there's places where if you don't have access, it obviously can be a fatality. There's places where people don't have access to healthcare in less industrialized countries. So monitoring, there's just so many opportunities to create efficiency and the positive disruption that can come. We're living with the opportunity to see some things. So here's what I'll say. This is how I'll finish up, because I'm just thinking about all of the possibilities. But it's like when my parents, big changes were perceived maybe, over 30, 40, 50 years. And then I think as, past 2000, past Y2K and maybe in 5 to 10 years, but the changes that we're seeing now are happening in, less than 2 years. At the Advanced Manufacturing Conference the year before, Christopher Lafayette, who's kind of a renowned speaker on the metaverse, said, better be really careful about systems and IT that you buy, because you could spend millions of dollars and it could be obsolete in 12 months based on what's in R&D. So what a unique time to be alive, relevant to knowledge and having better healthcare, eating better, nutrition. And I think it's going to be phenomenal to see. I just saw where there's, over this last year, the first Uber cars that are driverless in Arizona, for example. So there's going to be a lot of exciting things that are probably going to happen and as we move forward. And so I'm excited to see what that looks like and how that hopefully brings us together and creates opportunities for positivity.
Well, thank you, Darwin, for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and for telling us about Shurig Solutions and everything that you're doing on the talent management side. If people want to check you out, where should they go? Where would they go to find you?
Yeah, so they can go to www.shurigsolutions.com. They can find me. If you put Darwin in, there's not a whole lot of Darwins that pop up, so I'll probably pop up there pretty quickly. But for somebody that wants a partner versus a vendor, and somebody that is going to understand their value prop, that's going to understand and that guarantees, their work relevant to bringing on people that are going to help fit the culture, would love to talk to them about, helping them with any projects that they have coming up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the time. It's an honor to be on the podcast, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.